On the night of November 15th, 2009, in the small Midwestern town of Snowbridge, 23-year-old Rachel Miller told friends she was heading out for a date she had been looking forward to. Just before leaving, she posted a short message on social media. "Tonight feels different." By 8 p.m., her phone sent its final signal near the outskirts of town, and then went silent. Rachel never showed up for work the next morning. Within days, her family was in panic. Volunteers printed flyers across the county, and candlelight vigils lit up the quiet streets of Snowbridge. What began as a simple night out had now turned into a mystery that left an entire community searching for answers. But what really happened that night? And who was the mysterious woman Rachel trusted enough to meet? Before we uncover the investigation, make sure to subscribe, follow our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss the rest of this haunting story. In the heart of the Midwest, where the winters howled and snowdrifts could swallow a car whole, the town of Snowbridge sat quietly under a bone-chilling November wind. On nights like these, most people in Snowbridge drew their curtains early, locking out the icy air and the sense of restless stillness that seemed to seep in from the barren fields. The wind rattled the glass of second-story windows, moaned through the cracks in old fences, and found every loose shingle and forgotten yard tool making the familiar world feel slightly menacing and deeply alone. Rachel Miller's small upstairs bedroom was a sanctuary from that world. A warm, cluttered space where childhood's stuffed animals still shared shelf space with adult anxieties and half-finished sketches. She stood before her vanity mirror, pulling a brush through her golden blonde hair, eyes reflecting not only her own image but the hopes she barely dared to speak. Tonight was supposed to be different. Maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something new. She reached for her phone, her thumb hovering for a moment above the Instagram app before opening it. Her latest story read, "Tonight feels different. Maybe a new start." The words glowed on the screen, a tiny pulse of optimism sent out into the darkness beyond her walls. In her reflection, she managed to smile, the corners of her mouth trembling with anticipation and a hint of nervous doubt. Rachel had always been a little too trusting, at least according to her parents. She grew up in a household where kindness was a currency, one her mother insisted would never run out, and her father cautioned was sometimes too easily spent. The Millers were a close-knit family, the kind who still made time for Sunday dinners and long phone calls even after Rachel had moved out and started her own quiet life. Her parents worried about her, how she preferred sketching by the window to going out, how she let every stray cat into her apartment, and how the digital world seemed to offer her more connection than the faces in her real life ever could. The snow outside came in thick, swirling sheets, obscuring the familiar shapes of her neighborhood, turning the world into a blank canvas, one that could hold anything, promise or threat. Rachel zipped up her coat, pulled on a pair of gloves, and slipped her phone into her pocket. She checked herself one last time in the mirror, breathing out a shaky laugh at the girl staring back. "It's just a date," she whispered to her reflection, as if saying it aloud could make it true. Downstairs, the living room light cast a warm glow into the hallway, but Rachel paused at the threshold, letting her hand rest on the banister as she listened to the wind clawing at the house. Her roommate, Sarah, called out from the kitchen, her voice muffled by a mouthful of pizza. "You sure you don't want me to give you a ride? It's brutal out there." Rachel shook her head, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "It's not far, and Anna said she'd pick me up anyway." She hesitated, then added, "I'll text you if anything changes." It was a ritual, this promise of safety, a digital lifeline in a world growing more unpredictable by the day. Her boots crunched on the salted steps as she descended, her breath visible in the frozen air. She paused for a moment on the porch, feeling the weight of the night pressing in on her, and wondered, not for the first time, if the stories her mother told her about gut feelings were more than just superstition. Tonight, though, she pushed the doubt aside. After all, Anna seemed sweet, funny, a little shy, but not in a threatening way. They'd messaged for weeks before finally agreeing to meet. On the edge of the driveway, headlights cut through the dark like a beacon, illuminating swirling snowflakes that looked almost beautiful in their brief flight before dissolving into the slush. The car was newer than Rachel expected, its wipers struggling against the onslaught of snow, and inside Anna waved with a nervous grin. Rachel felt a flutter of excitement and apprehension as she climbed in, shaking the snow from her boots. The heater blasted against the windows, fogging the glass, and Rachel found herself relaxing, if only a little. Anna was even prettier in person. Dark hair pulled back, sharp blue eyes full of a warmth that put Rachel at ease. They made small talk as Anna navigated the icy roads, laughter blooming in the car's confined warmth. Rachel's phone buzzed in her pocket with a message from Sarah, a silly meme about first dates in snowstorms, and she smiled, thumbs dancing over the screen to send a quick reply. All good. Wish me luck. Neither of them noticed the car that followed at a distance. Headlights dimmed, keeping to the shadows as they left behind the familiar streets of Snowbridge and headed toward the outskirts. The roads became rougher, the houses farther apart, and Rachel's heart beat a little faster with every mile. She reminded herself that adventure always started with a leap into the unknown. Later, people would say it was an ordinary night. They'd remember the way the wind rattled the windows, how the snow kept most folks indoors, how nothing bad ever really happened in a town like Snowbridge, until suddenly it did. They'd wonder, in the haunted days and weeks that followed, if Rachel had a sense of what was waiting for her beyond that door. Did she know this would be the last time anyone saw her alive? Did she feel the cold breath of fate brushing her shoulder as she stepped into the car? Or was it just the wind, swirling and restless as always? No one could answer those questions. All anyone knew was that Rachel Miller left her house that night, full of hope and cautious optimism, and vanished into the darkness without a trace. And as the hours stretched on, the light in her bedroom window glowed long after midnight, a silent witness to the night that changed everything. What really awaited Rachel beyond that door? Long before the world outside turned threatening, Rachel Miller's life had been shaped by the quiet rhythms of Snowbridge, a town nestled amid endless fields and ancient oaks, where life moved at the speed of the seasons. To outsiders, Snowbridge looked like something out of a postcard. Painted wooden storefronts lining Main Street, a single blinking traffic light, the scent of cinnamon rolls drifting from Betty's diner on frosty mornings. There were annual parades, charity bake sales, Friday night football games that drew the entire town, and a general belief that nothing truly bad could ever take root here. Rachel fit the town's gentle pace, yet always felt a touch out of step with its simple routines. From childhood, she'd been the one who stayed late in the art room after class, her hands streaked with pencil and charcoal, filling page after page with sketches of things both real and imagined. Cats appeared most often in her drawings, tabby, calico, black and white, slipping through alleys, curled on windowsills, leaping from branch to branch in the trees behind her parents' house. Animals seemed to understand her quiet, thoughtful nature. Stray cats and lost dogs found their way to her more often than to anyone else on the block. Her parents, Mark and Linda Miller, watched over her with a love sharpened by worry. They were the kind of couple who had weathered life's storms side by side, building a home filled with laughter, patience, and a stubborn insistence that kindness could solve most problems. They cherished Rachel's gentle spirit, but wondered if it left her too vulnerable in a world they no longer fully trusted. Her mother would sometimes sit on the edge of Rachel's bed, fingers brushing her daughter's hair, and urge her to be careful, to lock her doors, to be wary of people who wore too easy smiles. Her father taught her to change a tire and check the oil, always reminding her that self-reliance was its own kind of armor. Yet, despite their warnings, Rachel believed in the best of people. She struck up conversations with customers at the furniture store, listened to lonely old men talk about their grandchildren, and patiently helped young couples choose bedroom sets they could barely afford. She shared sketches of cats with children who came in with their parents, sometimes tucking a quick doodle into their coat pockets as a secret gift. Her longing for real connection was like an ache beneath the surface, an ache she tried to soothe with art, with kindness, and sometimes with hesitant swipes through dating apps on lonely nights. Rachel's small apartment sat just above the local bakery, the smell of warm bread rising through the floorboards every morning. Her roommate, Sarah, was outgoing, always ready with a joke or a party invitation, a whirlwind of motion to Rachel's stillness. Sarah often tried to pull Rachel into her world of laughter and noise, but Rachel preferred quiet nights at home, curled under a blanket with a sketch pad and a sleepy tabby in her lap. Snowbridge, too, was a place that prized comfort and routine. Doors were left unlocked. Children rode bikes past sunset without fear. Gossip flowed freely, but rarely turned mean. News of crime, any crime, was met with disbelief, as if evil was something that belonged to distant cities, not their own safe little world. The most scandalous event in recent memory had been a high school prank involving the principal's lawn flamingos. But underneath the surface calm, Rachel's parents harbored a persistent anxiety. They noticed how the world had changed, how headlines from nearby cities seemed to creep ever closer, bringing with them stories of violence, loss, and heartbreak. They encouraged Rachel to be careful with new friends she made online, reminding her again and again that people weren't always who they claimed to be. Rachel always nodded, promising to be smart, but in her heart she couldn't help hoping to find someone who truly understood her, a person as honest and open as she tried to be. It was that hope which led her to Anna Rivers. They met on Tinder, trading stories and photographs, each message another brick in the fragile bridge that stretched from Rachel's world to Anna's. Anna's profile showed a woman with dark hair and mischievous eyes, a quick wit, and a love of books and travel. She seemed different, kind, curious, sincere. They exchanged late-night confessions and inside jokes, building trust with every message. When Anna finally suggested meeting in person, Rachel hesitated only briefly before saying yes. Her parents never met Anna, but she told Sarah, who teased her about the date, offering to act as a secret bodyguard if things felt weird. The day of the date, Snowbridge was wrapped in a gray shroud of early winter, the roads slick and the air tinged with the promise of snow. Rachel's parents called to check in, their voices warm but edged with worry. Rachel reassured them she would be safe, promising to text if her plans changed. She tidied her apartment, fed her tabby, then stood at her window, watching the snow begin to fall in earnest, tiny white motes swirling in the streetlights, softening the edges of everything she knew. As she waited for Anna's car to pull up, Rachel felt both excitement and a subtle, indefinable dread. She reminded herself that everyone took chances for love, for friendship, for the hope of something more. In a town where nothing bad ever happened, she couldn't imagine the world shifting under her feet. She clung to the belief that she could trust, that kindness would be repaid in kind, that the world was still mostly good. Somewhere outside, in the swirling dark, fate waited patiently. And so, as the lights of Anna's car appeared at the curb, Rachel took a deep breath and stepped out into the snow, her footprints crisp and clean behind her, each one a silent testament to faith, to hope, and to the invisible dangers waiting just beyond the glow of home. November nights in Snowbridge were long, silent, and deceptively calm, the kind of nights where the world felt suspended, waiting for something to break the stillness. Rachel Miller's evening had started with hope. Excitement mingled with nerves as she followed Anna Rivers in the car through the quiet outskirts of town. The streets thinned. The familiar houses gave way to fields of corn and bare woods, and the glow of distant lights stretched thin over the horizon. Each mile carried Rachel further from her safety, yet she didn't notice the subtle shift, didn't hear the soft whisper of danger threading its way through the night. Anna's voice was easy, casual, her blue eyes catching the dashboard light as she smiled with practiced warmth. She told stories of trips she'd taken, small victories at work, childhood memories, and Rachel listened, letting herself believe in the honesty of the words, the simplicity of human connection. Every detail seemed designed to put Rachel at ease. There was nothing to suggest the web being spun around her was already closing. By the time they reached the outskirts, the world had become a gray blur of snow-laden fields and skeletal trees. Rachel's phone, which had felt like a tether to home, lay quiet in her coat pocket, the notifications silenced by the car's motion. She felt a brief pang of guilt for not letting her parents or Sarah know exactly where she was, but Anna had promised they wouldn't be long. It seemed ordinary, reasonable, safe, the kind of trust that made small-town hearts open. At precisely 8 o'clock, Rachel's phone pinged. It was the last message she ever received, a trivial note about meeting up with Anna at a small cafe near the edge of town. By the time she glanced down to read it, the moment had passed. Snowflakes swirled against the windshield like scattered silver dust, and the road ahead seemed to stretch endlessly. No one knew in that fleeting instant that her life was about to end its ordinary rhythm. Rachel never noticed the dark shapes lurking beyond the tree line, shadows that mirrored the outline of human form yet moved with unnatural precision. She never suspected that the warm car, the soft laughter, and the gentle hand gestures were part of a carefully orchestrated deception. The distance from town, the isolation of the back roads, and the blank canvas of night had been chosen for one reason: to ensure no one could witness what was about to happen. By the following morning, Rachel's absence was impossible to ignore. She failed to show up at the furniture store, her shift conspicuously empty. Her co-workers initially assumed she was ill or had called out, but as hours ticked by and no message arrived, worry crept into their routines. Calls to her phone rang endlessly, unanswered, the tiny digital bell of connection ignored by forces beyond anyone's understanding. Friends who had known her since high school shared concerned messages on social media, hoping someone had seen her, hoping for an explanation that never came. In Snowbridge, the news of her disappearance spread like an invisible chill through the community. The town was not accustomed to the unsolvable, the unexplained. Crime was rare, and when it did happen, It was almost always petty. Shoplifting, a minor dispute, the occasional car accident. These were the edges of fear here, the boundaries of danger people felt prepared to navigate. But a person vanishing, without a trace, after a simple date, that kind of violation of the ordinary made every street and doorway feel suddenly untrustworthy. Rachel's family, in the first hours of disbelief, did not yet grasp the full scope of the nightmare. They assumed she had perhaps missed her phone, maybe lingered somewhere after the date, or had been delayed. But when hour after hour passed, unease hardened into fear. Her parents drove through the sleepy streets, peering into familiar corners, their eyes straining for the smallest sign of her presence. A light left burning, a shadow in a window, the faintest silhouette against the snow. Meanwhile, Anna's story, polished and persuasive, offered no alarm. She portrayed the night as normal, a casual meetup that had gone as planned, yet with Rachel mysteriously straying somewhere beyond reach. For anyone listening, Anna's account seemed reasonable, convincing. And yet, the digital breadcrumbs, the last ping of Rachel's phone, the location data frozen near the edge of town, hinted at something far darker. By the time investigators would later piece it together, it would become clear that Anna had led Rachel into an orchestrated trap, a place chosen with careful calculation and grim intent. The townspeople began to talk in whispers, their curiosity edged with fear. Coffee shop patrons speculated in hushed tones, neighbors compared notes, and the sense of safety that had long defined Snowbridge began to erode. If someone like Rachel can vanish after a simple date, they murmured, are any of us truly safe? The thought lingered, unsettling and persistent, transforming even the familiar landscapes into corridors of uncertainty. Rachel's absence became a palpable weight in her apartment. Her sketchbooks lay untouched, pens scattered across the floor. Her tabby curled in the corner as if mourning an unspoken loss. Her friends refreshed their phones obsessively, scouring social media for any sign of her activity, any clue that would prove she had simply slipped away. But the silence was absolute, deafening in its completeness, a stark contrast to the noise of life that had surrounded her just hours before. It was not merely her disappearance that unsettled Snowbridge. It was the implication. A young woman, known for her kindness and introversion, vanished without warning, without reason, leaving behind only the echoes of a life interrupted. Ordinary nights had once been safe, predictable, and comforting. Now every wind-blown branch against a window, every shadow along an empty street, carried the weight of what had happened to Rachel. By the time the sun rose higher, snow glinting off frost-laced fields, the town was gripped by the realization that something extraordinary and terrible had occurred. A normal young woman, someone who had done nothing to provoke danger, was gone as if she had never existed. The ordinary, the mundane, and the familiar had been shattered in a single night, leaving behind a community suspended in fear and questions with no answers. And somewhere beyond the edges of Snowbridge, in places hidden and silent, the consequences of that night were already being written, out of sight, but not out of reach. Rachel's disappearance set the stage for a town's awakening to the darker possibilities of the world. A community forced to confront vulnerability in a place once thought immune to tragedy. The ordinary life she had led, the sketches, the cats, the quiet warmth of family and friends, was now a haunting memory, a prelude to the investigation and unraveling that would follow. Morning in Snowbridge brought a brittle, pale light that barely warmed the snow-covered streets, reflecting off the windows of homes where families stirred in uneasy sleep. Yet for the Millers, there was no rest. Rachel's absence had transformed the usual rhythm of the day into a tense, relentless search for answers. Her parents, Mark and Linda, moved through their home with a singular focus, printing flyers, scribbling notes, and tapping numbers into their phones with shaking hands. Each copy of Rachel's smiling face felt like a plea to the world. Help us find her before it is too late. Outside, the streets were quiet but watchful. Neighbors, sensing something amiss, stepped cautiously from their homes. Glancing at the Millers' frantic activity, feeling the palpable weight of fear and uncertainty. Snowbridge had always been a town where life felt safe, where doors were left unlocked and children rode their bikes until dusk without worry. But now an invisible threat hung over the familiar streets. The thought that one of their own could vanish without warning sent a chill deeper than the winter air. Rachel's friends turned to the digital world, streaming pleas across social media in the hope that someone, somewhere, had seen her. Live broadcasts showed faces strained with worry, voices trembling with desperation. They described Rachel's habits, her routines, her love of sketching and cats, the subtle quirks that made her unmistakable. Every detail was repeated, amplified, and shared, echoing across the town and beyond, a collective effort to locate someone who had disappeared into the darkness. The Millers' home became a nerve center of grief and hope, the air thick with tension and sorrow. Flyers were plastered on lampposts, store windows, and community boards, each one a visual cry for help. Friends helped, distributing the images, tapping doors, and calling neighbors. At each home, the reactions were the same: concern, disbelief, the quiet mutterings of a community realizing that nothing was as secure as it once seemed. Candles flickered in windows across Snowbridge, small beacons of hope against the pervasive anxiety that had settled over the town. People gathered in front yards, holding vigil for a girl they barely knew, but now feared they had lost. Soft prayers and whispered wishes mingled with the wind, rising to meet the drifting snow, forming an invisible network of concern that stretched across the town. In these moments, Snowbridge no longer felt like a simple, peaceful place. It had become a community caught between hope and horror, each heartbeat synchronized with the unanswered question of Rachel's whereabouts. Even as the town rallied, fear seeped into the corners of daily life. Parents hesitated before sending their children to school, locking doors twice over, eyes scanning the street for anything unusual. Shopkeepers peered from behind counters, wondering if someone might appear, if someone could vanish in the same way Rachel had. The ordinary had been shattered, and in its place grew a shadow of uncertainty that touched every home and every passerby. Mark and Linda Miller barely slept, each night filled with the ritual of hope and dread. They left a light burning in Rachel's room, a fragile symbol that her presence still mattered, that she was not yet forgotten. It was a simple act, but it carried enormous weight, a daily reminder that love and attention might pierce the veil of darkness, that vigilance could sustain hope even when fear threatened to consume it. To them, the light was not only practical but sacred, a talisman against forgetting, against despair. Neighbors joined in silent support, bringing food to the Millers' home, offering rides, and providing reassurance that Rachel's disappearance would not be ignored. Candlelight vigils drew small crowds, faces illuminated in the soft glow, expressions etched with worry and sorrow. Some whispered prayers aloud, others stood silently, hearts heavy with the weight of what might have happened. The collective anxiety of Snowbridge created an almost tangible atmosphere, one that clung to the walls of homes and stores alike, seeping into the streets like mist. With each passing hour, the realization that Rachel had disappeared under seemingly ordinary circumstances deepened the town's unease. It was not just a loss, it was a breach of trust, a violation of the belief that small towns could be immune to darkness. The community began to confront its own vulnerability, questioning routines that had once felt safe and familiar. Doors that had never been locked were now bolted. The streets, once inviting, felt empty and hollow. The Millers continued their tireless efforts, driven by a combination of love, fear, and an unrelenting hope that Rachel might be found. Flyers, phone calls, and digital alerts formed a tapestry of urgency that connected the town in ways that were both comforting and frightening. Each ring of a phone, each approaching car, stirred anticipation and dread. Every shadow at a window brought a flicker of hope and a reminder of what was at stake. In the quiet moments between frantic activity, the absence of Rachel's laughter and presence was painfully tangible. Her bedroom, neat yet cluttered with sketches and memories, seemed frozen in time, a testament to the life that had been abruptly interrupted. The town, once so serene and familiar, had become a stage for anxiety and fear, its ordinary rhythms suspended in the wake of a disappearance that challenged the very essence of safety. Snowbridge had never felt smaller, never felt more exposed. The people who had once taken comfort in the simplicity of their lives now confronted a truth that was impossible to ignore. If someone as ordinary, as kind, and as careful as Rachel could vanish after a single date, then no one was truly safe. And somewhere beyond the warm homes, the glowing candles, and the vigilant neighbors, the world had shifted imperceptibly, carrying Rachel into a darkness that none could yet see, and a mystery that would demand answers from a community unprepared for the depth of its unfolding horror. The town of Snowbridge, once a quiet haven, now stood on the edge of fear and uncertainty. Rachel's disappearance had pulled back the veil, revealing the fragility of ordinary life and the lurking presence of danger where it had never been suspected. And in every home, on every street, the question remained: if Rachel could vanish, could anyone truly feel safe again? The quiet town of Snowbridge, long accustomed to predictable winters and routine lives, now found itself under the glare of scrutiny and suspicion. Rachel Miller's disappearance had shattered the comforting illusion of safety, leaving the community anxious and watchful. In the days that followed, the authorities began to untangle the threads of her last known movements, seeking answers where none seemed immediately visible. Police officers traced Rachel's phone records, piecing together the moments leading up to her disappearance. Every ping, every location data point was scrutinized, every timestamp analyzed for anomalies. It was during this painstaking process that two names emerged with unnerving clarity: Anna Rivers, the woman Rachel had met on Tinder, and Damian Cole, a man connected to Anna, whose history was anything but innocent. Damian's name carried weight in the system. A background check revealed prior arrests, mostly for fraud and deceit, though nothing violent. Yet the shadow of his criminal record was enough to raise eyebrows in a town that had never faced such malevolence before. Authorities obtained surveillance footage from the area surrounding Rachel's last known location. The grainy video captured brief glimpses of Anna's vehicle, a nondescript sedan weaving through the snowy streets, headlights cutting through flurries of falling snow. Later footage suggested that the car had veered down a desolate road at the town's edge, the lights briefly illuminating fields and corn rows that would later play a grim role in the investigation. Though the images provided no definitive proof of wrongdoing, the combination of timing, location, and association with Damien created an unmistakable thread that led the investigators to focus on the pair. Attempts to contact Anna and Damien yielded a mix of denial and mockery. They released a live stream through social media, ostensibly to clear their names, their faces lit by the glow of smartphones. Anna's voice was calm, almost casual, while Damien's expression carried a smirk that unsettled even seasoned officers. "She probably ran off with someone else," Anna said, dismissing concern with a shrug. Their portrayal of events seemed rehearsed, the kind of composure that masked something darker, something premeditated. Investigators were not swayed by their performance. A deeper dive into financial records and store receipts uncovered evidence that made the casual denial impossible to ignore. On the night of Rachel's disappearance, purchases had been made under Damien's name. Garbage bags, bleach, a utility knife, and an extension cord. All of these items, seemingly ordinary, were now cast in a sinister light by the context in which they appeared. The timing of the purchases, within hours of Rachel's final text, created a chilling implication that these supplies had been gathered deliberately for purposes that were horrifyingly specific. Despite these discoveries, law enforcement faced a frustrating obstacle. Without direct evidence, without witness testimony, without surveillance capturing an explicit act, the case stalled. Officers could establish motive and opportunity, trace the movements of the suspects, and highlight suspicious purchases. But the final link, the incontrovertible proof tying Rachel's disappearance to Damien and Anna, remained elusive. Each passing day added weight to the uncertainty, leaving the town's residents restless and fearful, and Rachel's family desperate for closure that refused to come. The investigation extended beyond the immediate suspects. Friends and acquaintances were questioned, each timeline reconstructed and cross-referenced, yet the picture remained incomplete. Even small details, a missed phone call, a stray text, a neighbor's memory of a car passing late at night, were scrutinized for relevance. Each fragment, no matter how minor, was a potential key to understanding the incomprehensible. The painstaking work left detectives exhausted, but they pressed on, driven by a recognition of what was at stake. A young life vanished in the shadows, and a community grappling with the fragility of its trust. Snowbridge itself responded in ways both visible and quiet. Parents held children closer, neighbors cast wary glances at strangers, and shopkeepers lingered near doorways, scanning the streets for anything suspicious. The town's sense of innocence had been ruptured, replaced by a hyper-awareness that left everyone feeling exposed. Candlelight vigils continued, a faint attempt to impose light against the overwhelming darkness, while social media became a digital grid of hope and anxiety, linking townsfolk in a collective vigilance. At the Miller household, the tension was almost unbearable. Flyers multiplied across walls and windows, phone calls went unanswered, and every notification sparked a surge of hope that inevitably faded into disappointment. Rachel's parents oscillated between determination and despair, their daily routines consumed by the relentless effort to keep their daughter's memory alive while pushing authorities to pursue every possible lead. Each trace of evidence, each rumor or tip, was pursued with urgency, yet each dead end deepened the gnawing fear that time was slipping away. The combination of evidence, behavior, and the inexplicable disappearance began to paint a stark picture for investigators. Anna's charm and Damien's past created a facade that could easily mislead a casual observer, yet the underlying pattern was unmistakable. The purchases made that night, the calculated movements into remote areas, and the coinciding timing with Rachel's last known contact suggested more than coincidence. The authorities understood that they were staring at a case that could spiral into something unimaginable if not handled with care. Even as detectives dug deeper, Snowbridge remained suspended in uncertainty. The town had shifted, its ordinary rhythms broken by fear, curiosity, and grief. Each corner of the familiar streets seemed a little darker, each shadow a little more threatening. The normal warmth of community gatherings and friendly smiles was replaced by quiet observation and whispered speculation. People questioned their neighbors, checked in with friends more frequently, and left lights burning in homes long after they had once felt necessary. In this atmosphere of vigilance and dread, the investigation into Rachel's disappearance became the town's defining focus. Every call, every receipt, every camera frame held the potential to unravel the mystery, yet nothing so far could deliver the final confirmation. The uncertainty lingered like fog over Snowbridge, blanketing the streets, seeping into the houses, and settling over the hearts of those who loved Rachel most. The ordinary life of the town had been irrevocably changed, and the hunt for answers had only just begun. The discovery of potential evidence and the emergence of Anna Rivers and Damien Cole as suspects set the stage for Snowbridge's descent into collective fear, laying the foundation for weeks of uncertainty, suspense, and the eventual devastating revelations that would follow. Weeks passed, and the initial frenzy surrounding Rachel Miller's disappearance began to ebb, replaced by a quieter, more insidious tension that settled over Snowbridge like frost on dormant fields. The town, once consumed by daily searches and candlelit vigils, now faced the hollow unease that comes when unanswered questions linger too long. Conversations turned to whispers, whispers to sighs, and the collective hope that had driven neighbors and friends to action began to fray under the weight of uncertainty. Law enforcement, constrained by the absence of direct evidence, moved cautiously. Leads had been followed, interviews conducted, and every piece of circumstantial proof scrutinized. But nothing could definitively connect Anna Rivers or Damien Cole to Rachel's disappearance. Surveillance footage showed only fleeting glimpses of cars moving through the snowy outskirts. Phone records confirmed the last pings, and store receipts hinted at premeditated preparation. But none of it amounted to a smoking gun. Without witnesses or clear confirmation, the case remained open yet stalled, a cold wound in the town's consciousness. At the Miller household, the passage of days weighed heavily on Mark and Linda So. The apartment, once filled with the warmth of family routines and mundane chatter, had become a shrine to absence. Rachel's room remained untouched, the sketches she had left behind lying scattered across the desk and floor, their familiar lines now haunting symbols of interrupted life. Every evening, her parents lit a single porch light, a quiet beacon that flickered in the darkness, meant to ward off the despair that threatened to consume them. It was a fragile ritual, one that allowed them to keep hope alive, if only a small, flickering piece of it. Outside, Snowbridge continued its daily routines, but the shadow of Rachel's disappearance lingered. The streets were quieter than usual, doors were locked more often, and conversations carried an undertone of wariness. The town had always been proud of its sense of security, its trust in neighbors and strangers alike. Now, that trust felt fragile, eroded by the realization that even the most ordinary lives could be disrupted in an instant. Parents hovered near their children, shopkeepers watched from behind counters, and the familiar rhythms of life were tinged with the awareness that nothing was guaranteed. Social media, which had once been a lifeline for finding Rachel, had cooled. Live streams dwindled, hashtags lost traction, and the urgency of public attention gave way to other news, other distractions. Yet for Rachel's family, the absence of these digital echoes only amplified their grief. Each passing day without a word, without a sign, made the silence feel heavier, more absolute. The world outside had moved on, but the Millers remained trapped in a loop of hope and despair, the uncertainty gnawing at their resolve. Friends and neighbors continued to offer support in quiet ways. Meals were left on doorsteps, sympathetic notes appeared in mailboxes, and brief check-ins provided reminders that Rachel had not been forgotten. Yet these gestures, though comforting, underscored the pervasive helplessness that defined the period. Snowbridge was a town trying to reconcile the familiarity of home with the incomprehensible possibility that someone could vanish without a trace. The investigative team revisited every detail repeatedly, each day bringing new scrutiny to old evidence. Phone pings were mapped against Anna and Damien's known movements, receipts were analyzed for inconsistencies, and even minor behavioral clues were re-examined for significance. Yet despite the diligence, no breakthrough emerged. Detectives spoke cautiously with the Millers, offering procedural reassurances, but little in the way of certainty. Every day ended with unanswered questions, every night with a lingering dread that Rachel might never be found. Within the town, the emotional landscape shifted subtly. People who had once offered daily help found themselves retreating into routines, unable to maintain the intensity of their initial efforts. The candlelight vigils became sporadic. Conversations about Rachel's disappearance turned quieter, more muted. Yet the sense of unease persisted, a low hum beneath the surface of everyday life, reminding residents that safety was no longer absolute. Snowbridge, a town that had once been immune to the specter of violence, now faced the quiet intrusion of fear that comes from unresolved loss. In the Miller home, the porch light burned every night, a stubborn declaration against the encroaching darkness. Mark and Linda clung to rituals that reminded them of Rachel's presence. The sketchbooks left open, her favorite blankets in place, the tabby curled in its accustomed corner. These small acts were more than comfort. They were symbolic defiance against the slow erasure that comes with time. The world might begin to forget, but they would not. The light became a silent anchor, a testimony to endurance, a signal to anyone listening that Rachel mattered, that her absence had not diminished her existence. Even as days blurred into weeks, the Millers held on to the fragile hope that the case might be reopened with fresh eyes, that a clue overlooked might finally emerge, illuminating the path to truth. Their vigilance was both an act of love and a struggle against despair, a recognition that memory, attention, and persistence were sometimes the only weapons against injustice and oblivion. Meanwhile, the town of Snowbridge adjusted to the new normal. Life continued, but its rhythms had changed. The sense of invulnerability that had once defined the community was replaced by a quiet wariness. People moved through their routines with an awareness that the ordinary could be deceptive, that safety was a fragile construct. Neighbors checked on one another more frequently. Conversations carried cautionary undertones, and the story of Rachel Miller became a silent reference point for vigilance and uncertainty. Weeks became a landscape of absence, The media attention waned, the viral urgency faded. But for Rachel's family, each day was a reminder of the fragility of ordinary life. The porch light burned on, unwavering, casting a small circle of warmth into the chill of a town trying to recover from a loss it did not fully understand. The cold case was more than an unresolved investigation. It was a quiet testament to the endurance of hope against the backdrop of despair, a symbol that, even when the world moves on, some lights remain steadfast against the darkness. The period of Rachel's disappearance marked Snowbridge's shift from immediate panic to prolonged uncertainty. The cold case became a slow-burning wound on the town's consciousness, while her family's unwavering hope and daily rituals kept her memory alive, setting the stage for the eventual shocking discovery that would shatter the remaining sense of safety. The chill of late November clung to the outskirts of Snowbridge like a shroud, the landscape a patchwork of frost-dusted cornfields and bare winter trees that creaked under the weight of the wind. For weeks the town had wrestled with absence, each day stretching longer than the last, filled with the unrelenting ache of uncertainty. The miller's porch light continued to burn each night, a solitary glow against the darkness, a fragile symbol of hope that defied the encroaching weight of despair. Then, on a morning that began like so many others, a farmer working the fields at the edge of town stumbled upon something unsettling. Black trash bags, scattered by the wind across a stretch of overgrown corn. At first, he assumed they were abandoned debris, remnants of some careless dumping. Yet the way they were placed, oddly deliberate in a line leading toward the trees, made him pause. There was something unsettling in their presence, something that pressed against the instinct to ignore them. Curiosity edged out routine caution, and he approached, heart thudding, and discovered the contents, hastily wrapped remnants of human life. The discovery shattered the thin veneer of normalcy that Snowbridge clung to. The farmer alerted authorities immediately, his voice trembling as he relayed the location and details. Within minutes, patrol cars and investigators arrived, lights flashing against the white-capped fields, officers moving with a tense urgency that contrasted sharply with the quiet, frozen landscape. The wind whipped through the corn, scattering dry leaves across the ground, carrying with it the faint scent of snow and something darker, metallic, and irrevocable. DNA analysis, conducted with meticulous care and precision, confirmed the truth that had haunted the town for weeks. The remains were Rachel's. The word itself carried an unbearable weight. Rachel Miller, the young woman whose smile had once lit her small bedroom and whose laughter had filled quiet afternoons, was gone. The reality of her death descended upon Snowbridge like a storm, leaving a trail of grief, disbelief, and simmering rage. The impact on her family was immediate and devastating. Mark and Linda Miller, who had clung to hope with every fiber of their being, were confronted with the absolute finality of loss. The light in Rachel's room burned brighter that night, as if in defiance, a desperate attempt to hold on to the memory of a life extinguished far too soon. Friends gathered in small clusters, some unable to speak, others offering quiet touches of comfort. Snowbridge itself seemed to pause, its usual hum of winter activity replaced by a collective mourning. For investigators, the discovery was both a breakthrough and a grim confirmation of their worst suspicions. The evidence suggested planning, premeditation, and intent. The black trash bags, hastily scattered yet methodically wrapped, pointed to someone with knowledge, someone willing to manipulate both time and space to conceal the crime. Every detail reinforced the chilling reality that Rachel's disappearance had not been an accident, nor the result of a fleeting lapse in judgment. It was a calculated act, a deliberate and horrifying orchestration that demanded answers. The town, which had once prided itself on safety and predictability, was forced to confront a stark new reality. Evil could exist even in the quietest corners. The fields where children had once played, the roads Rachel had traversed in trust, and the edges of town that had seemed benign were now transformed in memory into landscapes of danger. Residents found themselves double-checking doors, questioning the presence of strangers, and scrutinizing familiar faces for hidden intentions. The ordinary had been irrevocably altered. Even as the investigation intensified, Snowbridge struggled to process the psychological aftermath. Candlelight vigils became memorials of grief rather than hope, and the town's digital networks buzzed with speculation, sorrow, and a desperate need to understand how such a crime could occur. Rachel's friends and neighbors shared photos, memories, and sketches she had left behind, attempting to hold on to fragments of a life erased from the physical world. Her presence lingered, not in body, but in the memory of a community that refused to let her fade into nothingness. Authorities turned their attention immediately to Anna Rivers and Damian Cole, the two figures who had emerged early in the investigation. Patterns of movement, timing, and previous suspicious purchases painted a damning portrait. Investigators re-examined receipts, messages, and surveillance footage, seeking the moments that could definitively link the couple to the crime. The discovery of Rachel's remains added urgency and weight yet to a case that had been mired in uncertainty, transforming speculation into a focused and deliberate pursuit of justice. The emotional landscape of Snowbridge shifted dramatically. Residents who had once offered tentative support now felt a collective anger and a need for accountability. Community gatherings were no longer mere vigils. They became forums of shared grief, spaces where sorrow and outrage mingled, where the fragility of ordinary life was palpable in every conversation and gesture. The very streets, once familiar and safe, seemed marked by the tragedy, each footstep a reminder of the vulnerability of those who walked them. For the Millers, the revelation was simultaneously devastating and clarifying. The uncertainty that had tortured them for weeks was replaced by the stark knowledge of death. Yet with that knowledge came the ability to demand justice, to insist that Rachel's life, though cut short, mattered in the eyes of the law and the community. They began coordinating with investigators, sharing every detail they could remember, recounting Rachel's habits, routines, and friendships with a precision born of necessity. Every sketch she had left, every note she had made, became a piece of the puzzle, a way to honor her memory while contributing to the pursuit of truth. In the days following the discovery, Snowbridge settled into a tense rhythm of grief and vigilance. The town's normal winter routines continued, but every ordinary moment was overshadowed by the tragedy. Shops opened and closed, children went to school, and neighbors performed daily chores. Yet the weight of Rachel's absence was omnipresent. The community's innocence had been stripped away, replaced by a vigilant awareness of what could lurk beneath the surface of the familiar. And so the stage was set for the revelations that would follow. Rachel's death, now confirmed, demanded answers, accountability, and justice. Snowbridge, once a haven of trust and quiet lives, would never be the same. The ordinary streets, the familiar homes, the comforting rituals, all were transformed by the intrusion of malevolence, leaving a town forever conscious of what had been lost and what remained to be uncovered. Rachel's remains changed everything. The town's fear crystallized into determination. Grief became a shared force that bound the community, and the investigation shifted from hope to resolve. The next chapters of Snowbridge's ordeal would reveal the full extent of planning and cruelty behind the crime, forcing every resident to confront the darkness that had been hiding in plain sight. The discovery of Rachel Miller's remains shattered Snowbridge's fragile sense of security, transforming a quiet, ordinary town into a landscape haunted by fear and suspicion. In the days following the grim revelation, the investigation intensified, exposing details that chilled even the most seasoned law enforcement officers. The small Midwestern community, once insulated from the darker aspects of human behavior, confronted the terrifying truth that evil could not only exist but could thrive under the guise of charm and familiarity. As authorities examined the evidence, patterns emerged that painted a chilling picture of premeditation. Damian Cole, whose criminal record had hinted at deceit but not violence, became the focus of intense scrutiny. Receipts for bleach, trash bags, a utility knife, and extension cords, all purchased in the hours before Rachel vanished, suggested that the disappearance was no accident. Every item indicated forethought, a disturbing attention to detail that suggested planning rather than impulsivity. The evidence was stark, methodical, and terrifying in its precision. Anna Rivers's role, initially framed as that of a casual acquaintance and seemingly innocent participant, also began to take on a more sinister tone. Investigators pieced together messages, online interactions, and witness statements that suggested Anna had actively lured Rachel into a trap. Her charm, wit, and apparent warmth had built trust, creating an environment where Rachel felt safe stepping into unfamiliar territory. The realization that this trust had been manipulated, used as a tool to control and ultimately end a life, struck the town with a visceral horror. The legal framework surrounding the case required precision, yet the moral clarity was unmistakable. Damian, confronted with the mounting evidence, eventually confessed in detail that Rachel had died during what he described as a consensual sexual ritual gone wrong. On paper, the statement seemed intended to mitigate culpability, to frame the tragedy as an accident rather than a deliberate act. Yet investigators quickly identified contradictions. Records of purchases, prior communication between Damian and Anna, and the calculated nature of the rendezvous revealed that this was not an unplanned incident, but a meticulously orchestrated crime. Anna, in court and in public statements, positioned herself as a peripheral figure, a bystander who had allegedly been present but uninvolved in the ultimate act of violence. Her insistence on helplessness, however, collided with the mounting evidence of active participation in planning, timing, and manipulation. Authorities documented conversations, cross-referenced timelines, and verified communications that contradicted her assertions. Every message, every gesture, every trace of digital interaction painted a portrait of involvement, raising the unsettling question: was Anna merely a witness, or had she been the mastermind orchestrating events from behind a veneer of innocence? For the town of Snowbridge, these revelations added layers of unease. People who had once considered their neighbors, friends, and acquaintances as benign now recognized that outward appearances could mask dangerous intentions. Ordinary streets became tinged with suspicion. Familiar homes seemed less secure, and the boundaries between trust and vulnerability blurred. Candlelight vigils, once symbols of hope, now cast shadows that felt ominous, each flicker a reminder that even light could not fully illuminate the depths of human cruelty. Rachel's family, confronting the dual reality of grief and injustice, became an unrelenting force in pursuit of truth. Mark and Linda Miller meticulously reviewed every piece of evidence shared by investigators, tracing connections, timelines, and inconsistencies. Their grief was raw, yet it fueled an acute focus that ensured no detail went overlooked. They examined Rachel's online interactions, her messages, and her social media history, seeking patterns or clues that might reveal how trust had been manipulated and how an ordinary night had been transformed into a nightmare. In the community, the sense of collective shock gave rise to conversations that mingled grief with anger. Residents questioned the safety of their environment, the nature of human relationships, and the vulnerability inherent in trust. Schools, workplaces, and public spaces were suffused with a heightened awareness. Parents warned children about strangers online, friends discussed caution in meeting new acquaintances, and the ordinary rhythm of life was infused with vigilance and unease. Snowbridge, once a sanctuary of predictability, had become a place where every interaction could carry unseen risk. The courtroom became a theater of tension, the interplay between law, evidence, and morality creating a narrative that gripped the community. Damien's admission, weighed against tangible evidence of planning, created a dichotomy. A legal argument framed as accident versus the stark, objective reality of premeditated intent. Anna's claims of passive involvement further complicated matters, leaving both investigators and townspeople to grapple with questions of accountability, influence, and the moral weight of manipulation. Every revelation peeled back another layer of the intricate and disturbing orchestration that had led to Rachel's death. Even as the legal process unfolded, the town remained acutely aware that the truth was not confined to court records. Snowbridge absorbed each new detail like a physical force, its residents adjusting daily routines, modifying behaviors, and attempting to reconcile the ordinary with the extraordinary. The very act of walking through familiar streets, engaging with neighbors, or trusting someone new carried the shadow of Rachel's story. Ordinary life had been irrevocably altered, and the collective consciousness of the town bore the imprint of trauma and revelation. Ultimately, the tension that had gripped Snowbridge was not only about justice but about understanding. The community sought to comprehend how deception, manipulation, and cruelty could coexist with charm, beauty, and apparent innocence. The puzzle of human behavior, as exemplified by Anna and Damien, became an uncomfortable mirror, reflecting vulnerabilities and questions that each resident had previously avoided. Snowbridge had been forced to confront the uncomfortable reality that safety, trust, and morality are fragile constructs, capable of being breached in the most ordinary of settings. And so, the town waited, watching, listening, and hoping that the process of justice would illuminate the darkness that had engulfed their streets. The evidence against Damien and Anna was compelling, yet the moral and psychological complexity of their actions ensured that every revelation carried new questions. In the quiet corners of homes and streets, neighbors and friends reflected on the tragedy, aware that Rachel's death, though horrific and final, had opened a door to understanding, vigilance, and the necessity of confronting uncomfortable truths. Snowbridge, forever changed, now faced the long task of processing the events that had stripped its innocence. Trust had been violated, lives had been shattered, and the ordinary had been irrevocably transformed. Yet amid the grief and horror, the pursuit of truth and justice became a guiding force, ensuring that Rachel's story and the lessons it carried would resonate far beyond the night of her disappearance. The tragedy of Rachel Miller's story, though fictional, mirrored realities that were far too true in the world beyond Snowbridge. While the town wrestled with grief, fear, and the unraveling of trust, investigators and residents alike could not ignore the chilling parallels to a real-life case that had gripped the nation years earlier. The echoes of that case lent Rachel's story a gravity that went beyond local tragedy, linking the small town's horror to a pattern of deceit, manipulation, and devastating consequence. In Nebraska, 2017, a young woman named Sydney Irene Loof vanished under circumstances remarkably similar to Rachel's disappearance. Sydney, 24, had been active, curious, and trusting, meeting someone through a dating app in the hope of connection. The encounter, much like Rachel's, had seemed ordinary at the outset, a promise of companionship and warmth. What followed, however, was anything but ordinary. Weeks later, her dismembered remains were discovered, a revelation that shattered her community and stunned a nation already wary of the hidden dangers of modern technology and trust. Snowbridge residents could relate to the shock and disbelief that must have swept through Sydney's community. The terror of realizing that someone safe, kind, and unsuspecting could be drawn into the calculated cruelty of others resonated deeply. Just as Rachel's parents had lit a porch light each night in hope, Sydney's family had clung to the fragile threads of optimism, searching for signs that she was still alive, hoping against overwhelming odds that her story would not end in tragedy. The realization that the ordinary could harbor unspeakable danger forced a reckoning that transcended the boundaries of time and place. Investigators studying Rachel's disappearance drew not only on evidence, but also on the lessons from the real case. The patterns were eerily consistent: the use of charm and flattery to gain trust, the orchestration of meetings in isolated locations, and the deliberate concealment of evidence. Anna Rivers and Damian Cole's actions reflected the manipulative dynamics documented in Sydney Loof's case, reinforcing the understanding that such crimes often involved meticulous planning rather than impulsive acts. The chilling symmetry between fiction and reality underscored the universality of vulnerability, the ease with which trust could be weaponized, and the devastating consequences when it was. For the Millers and the residents of Snowbridge, this connection lent both clarity and weight to the investigation. Understanding that Rachel's disappearance was not a random anomaly, but part of a broader pattern of exploitation and violence reframed the narrative. It was no longer merely about a young woman vanishing in isolation. It became a cautionary tale about the hidden perils in familiar surroundings, the dangers that could emerge from seemingly ordinary encounters, and the necessity of vigilance in a world that often masked danger behind smiles and charm. The town itself became a microcosm of collective reckoning. Candlelight vigils, which had begun as an expression of hope, evolved into a public acknowledgement of a broader societal vulnerability. Schools incorporated lessons on digital safety, parents became more vigilant in monitoring interactions, and the community's dialogue shifted toward preventative awareness. Snowbridge, once insulated by routine and familiarity, had become a place of education born of tragedy, where the lessons of both Rachel's story and the real-life case informed the behaviors and choices of its residents. Even within the legal process, the shadow of the real case influenced strategy and perception. Prosecutors examining Anna and Damian's involvement recognized the patterns of grooming, manipulation, and premeditation that had characterized the Loof case. Each step in the investigation, each question posed during depositions, and each piece of evidence presented in court drew on the understanding that these crimes were rarely impulsive. They required foresight, planning, and the deliberate exploitation of vulnerability. For the authorities, Rachel's story became a blueprint for recognizing and prosecuting the deliberate orchestration behind seemingly ordinary encounters. The psychological toll on the community was profound. Residents who had once taken comfort in the predictability of small-town life were forced to acknowledge the fragility of safety. Trust, once assumed, now required scrutiny. Every new friend, every social interaction, carried the potential for unseen risk. Rachel's disappearance, echoing Sidney Loof's real-life tragedy, transformed communal understanding of danger. It was not always violent in overt ways, but it could be calculated, concealed, and executed with precision. The ordinary world had been disrupted, leaving behind a landscape of vigilance, reflection, and for some, lingering fear. Amid this collective reckoning, Rachel's family continued their tireless pursuit of justice and understanding. Every lesson gleaned from the real case informed their approach: how to support investigators, how to document details meticulously, and how to channel grief into actionable determination. The Millers' advocacy went beyond personal loss. It became part of a broader societal awareness, a reminder that awareness and diligence could be tools to prevent further tragedies. Each call to authorities, each reminder of timelines and relationships, became part of a larger tapestry of accountability. For the residents of Snowbridge, the connection to Sidney Loof's case underscored the universality of risk in the modern world. Trust, kindness, and hope, though essential to human connection, carried vulnerabilities that could be exploited. The town's quiet streets and cozy homes no longer offered the illusion of impenetrable safety, and residents carried with them the lessons of both Rachel and Sidney: that vigilance and awareness were as necessary as compassion, that ordinary encounters could conceal extraordinary danger, and that the smallest decisions, checking in with a friend, leaving a light burning, documenting a meeting, could have profound implications. In the end, the intersection of fiction and reality became a powerful reminder of both fragility and resilience. Rachel's story, though imagined, mirrored the truths of countless communities affected by similar crimes. The town of Snowbridge, shaped by tragedy, adapted, learned, and persisted. Its streets, once symbols of routine and familiarity, now bore witness to a deeper understanding that loss, awareness, and action were inextricably intertwined, and that memory, both personal and collective, served as a safeguard against the repetition of horror. Through grief, reflection, and the pursuit of justice, the story of Rachel Miller connected Snowbridge to the broader realities of the world beyond its borders, ensuring that her life, though cut short, would resonate as a warning, a lesson, and a testament to the vigilance required to protect the vulnerable in a world capable of extraordinary cruelty. The chill of winter lingered over Snowbridge long after Rachel Miller's disappearance and the tragic confirmation of her death. The town, once a quiet sanctuary of familiar streets and trusting neighbors, had been transformed by events that none could have anticipated. Each snow-dusted corner, each empty street, seemed imbued with a somber consciousness, a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. In the wake of grief, the community struggled not only to comprehend the horrors that had unfolded, but to preserve the memory of a life cut far too short. For the Miller family, the loss of Rachel was an enduring ache that no passage of time could fully alleviate. Every morning, Mark and Linda moved through routines once shared with their daughter, now filled with empty spaces where her presence had been. The sketches she left behind, scattered across her desk, were no longer just art. They were fragments of a personality abruptly silenced, vivid remnants of a young woman whose creativity, compassion, and curiosity had been stolen from the world. The porch light, burned night after night, became more than a beacon of hope. It was a symbol of enduring love, a way to assert that Rachel's life mattered even in absence, a declaration that memory and justice were intertwined. In Snowbridge, the impact of her story resonated deeply. Neighbors and friends, once only tangentially aware of Rachel's presence, became intimately connected to the narrative of loss and vigilance. Candlelight vigils persisted, now as acts of remembrance rather than search, each flame a small testament to communal grief and shared humanity. Schools and local organizations introduced conversations about digital safety and personal responsibility, blending caution with empathy, ensuring that Rachel's story would inform choices for years to come. The ordinary rhythms of life returned only partially, tempered by an awareness that safety could not be assumed, that vigilance was both a moral and practical necessity. Legal proceedings brought their own form of closure. Damian Cole's confession, corroborated by evidence of premeditation, ensured that the act that had ended Rachel's life would not be obscured by ambiguity. Anna Rivers's role, debated and dissected in court, underscored the complexity of culpability, the disturbing reality that manipulation and indirect participation could have consequences as grave as overt violence. The judicial process, meticulous and deliberate, became a framework through which Rachel's story was acknowledged, her life given weight, and her death recognized as an act of deliberate cruelty. For the Millers and for Snowbridge, justice was not a balm for grief, but a necessary affirmation that wrongdoing would not go unanswered. Amid these legal and procedural resolutions, the narrative of Rachel Miller's life and death also became a broader reflection on human vulnerability, connection, and the consequences of trust. Her story, while rooted in a fictional account, drew clear parallels to the real-life tragedy of Sydney Irene Loof, reminding residents that the dangers of manipulation and exploitation were not confined to distant cities or anonymous headlines. The connection to real events amplified the cautionary message. Young people navigating relationships, especially those formed online, faced risks that required awareness, communication, and safeguards. Rachel's story became both a memorial and a guide, highlighting the necessity of vigilance without diminishing the human desire for connection. In Snowbridge, memorials and personal rituals sustained her presence in the hearts of those who had loved her. Flowers adorned the spots where she had been last seen. Photographs of her smiles appeared in local establishments, and community events often included moments of silence to honor her memory. Residents who had once taken their surroundings for granted began to act with heightened attentiveness, checking in with friends, leaving lights on in the night, and encouraging safe practices among young people. Rachel's absence had, paradoxically, created a more mindful, more protective community, one in which her life continued to influence daily choices. For Rachel's friends, the loss was both immediate and enduring. The sketches she had shared, the small acts of kindness she had performed, and the vibrant curiosity she had embodied became touchstones of memory. Every shared story, every photo, every recollection was an act of remembrance, reinforcing the importance of her presence in the lives of others. The digital spaces where she had once been active Social media profiles, messages, images became memorials, not only of her life but of the cautionary lessons embedded in her absence. Friends carried forward her legacy through advocacy, through education, and through the personal choices shaped by the haunting knowledge of what could be lost. At the core of the narrative was the delicate balance between grief and learning. Rachel's story underscored that some wounds could only be addressed through awareness, through acknowledgement of human frailty and moral responsibility. The ordinary patterns of life, dates, friendships, online interactions, carried latent risks that required attention, communication, and care. Rachel's parents, though bound by sorrow, exemplified the capacity to translate grief into action, ensuring that the lessons drawn from loss extended beyond personal boundaries and into communal consciousness. The final reflection of Snowbridge, however, was not solely rooted in caution or fear. In the midst of tragedy, the town had also discovered resilience, compassion, and interconnectedness. The rituals of remembrance, the support networks activated in response to crisis, and the deliberate acts of community care demonstrated that even in the presence of darkness, human empathy and collective strength could endure. Rachel's story became a catalyst, illustrating that memory and vigilance could coexist, and that even when life is cruelly interrupted, the reverberations of love, attention, and remembrance can persist indefinitely. As the winter deepened and snow continued to blanket streets, the town moved forward, carrying Rachel's story in the folds of its consciousness. The porch light burned every night in the Miller home, a constant signal that some truths, love, loss, and memory, would not fade. Lessons were absorbed, vigilance remained heightened, and the legacy of a young woman whose life had been cruelly cut short continued to shape behavior, awareness, and collective responsibility. In the end, Rachel Miller's story was a memorial, a lesson, and a call to consciousness. It honored her life and spirit while serving as a warning of the hidden dangers that could lurk in ordinary encounters. It connected fiction to reality, Snowbridge to broader societal truths, and grief to purposeful action. Though her presence had been stolen, the impact of her life and the lessons of her death ensured that she would remain a guide, a warning, and a beacon for vigilance and remembrance. Some wounds can only be healed by truth, awareness, and action. In honoring Rachel, Snowbridge honored all those whose lives have been interrupted by deception and violence, ensuring that memory, justice, and vigilance endure. Her story, though tragic, remained a testament to the enduring power of love, community, and the responsibility to protect and remember. And it continues to serve as a reminder that even in darkness, light can persist.